The cold night air wrapped around young Liam as he tightened his grip on the handles of his delivery bike. At just 17, he was no stranger to long shifts and icy winds. Life in the city wasn't easy, especially when your dreams seemed farther than the stars above. But Liam wasn't one to complain. He'd always believed in hard work, even when the odds were stacked against him. As he pedaled across the dimly lit bridge, the silence of the night was broken only by the faint hum of passing cars in the distance. Out of the corner of his eye, Liam noticed something unusual. A woman stood by the edge of the bridge, her figure illuminated by the faint glow of a street lamp. She was dressed in a sleek black coat, the kind that screamed wealth, but her stance seemed precarious. The way she swayed, clutching the cold metal railing, sent a jolt of alarm through him. At first, he thought she might be admiring the view, but then he saw her head bow, her shoulders trembling as if weighed down by an invisible burden. Liam's heart pounded. He didn't know her story, he didn't even know her name, but something about her presence felt wrong. The bridge wasn't a place people came to linger at this hour, especially not someone like her. She looked out of place, vulnerable and deeply troubled. Without a second thought, Liam braked his bike and called out, "Ma'am, are you okay?" His voice echoed in the stillness, uncertain but genuine. The woman didn't respond. She only tilted her head slightly, as if hearing him, but choosing to ignore his words. The knot in Liam's stomach tightened. He didn't have time to weigh his options. Instincts took over. He abandoned his bike and sprinted toward her, his sneakers slapping against the wet pavement. "Please don't," he shouted as he drew closer, the desperation in his voice slicing through the night. She turned her head to look at him, her face pale and tear-streaked. For a moment, her eyes, filled with a haunting emptiness, locked with his. Liam reached out, his fingers barely brushing hers as she began to lean forward. The world seemed to move in slow motion. With every ounce of strength he had, he lunged and grabbed her arm, pulling her back just as she lost her balance. The momentum sent them both crashing to the ground, his back hitting the pavement with a sharp thud. The woman trembled in his grasp, her breaths ragged and shallow. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the distant roar of a car engine and the rhythmic pounding of Liam's heart in his ears. Finally, she whispered, "Why did you stop me?" Liam swallowed hard, his mind racing for an answer. "Because no one deserves to feel like this," he said, his voice soft but firm. He didn't know her story, but he knew pain when he saw it. The woman stared at him, her expression unreadable. Before she could respond, the sound of screeching tires broke the tension. A sleek black car pulled up to the curb, and two men in suits stepped out, their faces etched with worry. "Madam, are you all right?" one of them asked, rushing toward her. Liam stood up, unsure of what to do or say. The woman glanced at him one last time before allowing the men to escort her into the car. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Then, just like that, she was gone, leaving Liam standing on the bridge with more questions than answers. As he rode home that night, the events replayed in his mind. He couldn't shake the image of her tearful eyes or the weight of her words. Little did he know that moment would set off a chain of events that would change his life forever. The next morning, as Liam prepared for another long day of work, he noticed something unusual outside his small apartment. Parked by the curb was a shiny black car, the same one he had seen the night before. He blinked, unsure if his tired mind was playing tricks on him. But when the driver stepped out and approached with a formal air, Liam's heart skipped a beat. "Mr. Liam," the man asked, his tone polite yet authoritative. "My employer wishes to meet you. She insists it's urgent." Liam's world stood still. What could she possibly want with someone like him? His fingers tightened around the strap of his backpack as he hesitated. Was this an opportunity or trouble waiting to unfold? One thing was certain. His ordinary life was about to take an extraordinary turn. Liam stood frozen, his mind racing as he stared at the man in front of him. The sharp, polished suit, the immaculate car. Everything about this felt out of place in his world of late-night deliveries and modest living. He cleared his throat, trying to steady his nerves. I'm sorry, who's your employer?" he asked cautiously, his voice barely above a whisper. The man gave a small, polite smile, though his eyes remained serious. "Mrs. Evelyn Astor," he said, as if the name alone should explain everything. But to Liam, it didn't. He had no idea of who she was or why she would be looking for him. "She asked me to personally ensure you come with me. She'd like to speak with you in private." Liam's stomach churned with a mix of curiosity and unease. The woman from the bridge, was her name Evelyn Astor? And why was she reaching out to him now? He had expected their encounter to be a fleeting moment in a world too busy to notice people like him. Yet here he was, being summoned by someone who clearly belonged to an entirely different life. I have work," Liam stammered, gesturing to the delivery bag slung over his shoulder. He wasn't trying to be rude, but this was overwhelming, and he couldn't imagine abandoning his responsibilities for some mysterious meeting. The man nodded, as if he had anticipated Liam's reluctance. "You won't be penalized. I assure you, your time will be compensated generously. Mrs. Astor values your help from last night more than you realize." Liam hesitated. He had been raised to stay grounded, to know his place, and to avoid unnecessary risks. But the memory of Evelyn's haunted eyes flashed in his mind. Something about her vulnerability had stuck with him. And now, standing on the edge of what felt like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, he felt an inexplicable pull to see this through. With a deep breath, he nodded. "All right," he said, his voice steadying. "I'll go with you." The man opened the car door with a respectful bow of his head, and Liam stepped inside, sinking into the luxurious leather seat. He had never been in a car this nice before, and the smooth hum of the engine was almost unnerving in its silence. As they pulled away from his small apartment building, Liam stared out the window, watching the city blur past. The familiar streets suddenly felt distant, as if he were crossing into a different world. After what felt like an eternity, the car stopped in front of a sprawling mansion that looked like something out of a movie. The iron gates swung open, revealing manicured gardens and a grand stone facade that gleamed in the morning sun. Liam swallowed hard, his palms sweaty. This was nothing like his world. What could someone like Evelyn Astor possibly want with him? The man escorted him to the front door, where a butler greeted them and led Liam into a lavish sitting room. The furniture was elegant, the walls adorned with art he couldn't begin to understand. But it wasn't the opulence that made him nervous. It was the silence. He felt out of place, like an intruder in someone else's life. Then she appeared. Evelyn Astor walked into the room, her presence commanding yet surprisingly soft. She was dressed in a simple but expensive outfit, her makeup subtle yet flawless. She looked completely different from the distraught woman on the bridge, but her eyes, those same sorrowful eyes, gave her away. "Liam," she said, her voice warm but tinged with an unspoken weight. "Thank you for coming. Please sit." Liam obeyed, lowering himself onto the edge of a plush armchair. He felt like a child at a parent-teacher meeting, unsure of what to expect but bracing for something big. Evelyn sat across from him, studying him for a moment before speaking again. "I owe you more than words can express," she began, her tone earnest. "What you did last night, you saved my life, and for that, I'm forever in your debt." Liam shifted uncomfortably. "I just did what anyone would have done," he said quietly, not wanting to make a big deal of it. "No," Evan said firmly, her voice breaking slightly. "You did something extraordinary. You didn't look away. You cared enough to act, and that's more than most people would do." Her words hung in the air, and Liam didn't know how to respond. He wanted to brush it off, to downplay his actions, but something in her gaze stopped him. This wasn't just about gratitude. There was something deeper at play, something she wasn't saying. "I'm sorry for what you saw last night," Evelyn continued, her voice softer now. "I was in a dark place, a place I wouldn't wish on anyone. My life may seem perfect from the outside, but the truth is, it's complicated." Liam frowned, unsure of what to say. He couldn't imagine someone who lived in a house like this having real problems, but the pain in her voice was undeniable. "You don't have to explain," he said gently. "I just hope you're okay now." Evelyn gave a faint smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm better than I was, thanks to you. But there's something I need to tell you, something you deserve to know." Liam leaned forward, his heart pounding. What could she possibly have to say that involved him? Evelyn hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. "My husband, Charles, is a powerful man," she said finally. "He's a businessman, the kind who's always in the headlines, always surrounded by people who want something from him. Our life, it's not as simple as it seems. And last night, She stopped, her voice faltering. Liam waited, the suspense building with every passing second. "I can't go into details yet," Evelyn said, her tone heavy with regret. "But I believe fate brought you to that bridge for a reason. I want to help you, Liam. You've given me a second chance at life, and I intend to do the same for you." Liam blinked, her words washing over him like a wave. "Help me?" he repeated, unsure of what she meant. Evelyn nodded. "I know you're struggling. I can see it in your eyes and the way you carry yourself. Let me do something for you, something that could change your life." Liam's throat tightened. He wasn't used to handouts, and the idea of someone swooping in to fix his problems felt strange. But at the same time, there was something genuine in Evelyn's offer, something that made him believe she truly wanted to make things right. "What kind of help?" he asked cautiously. Evelyn's smile returned, this time with a hint of determination. "Anything you need," she said. "An education, a job, a home. Whatever it takes to give you the future you deserve. All I ask is that you trust me." Liam stared at her, his mind racing. This wasn't just an offer, it was a lifeline. But he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than Evelyn was letting on. Why him? Why now? And what did she mean about fate? As the questions swirled in his mind, Liam realized he was standing on the edge of a decision that could change everything. But was he ready to take the leap? Or was this too good to be true? Liam sat in silence, the weight of Evelyn's offer sinking in. He had always believed that life didn't hand out favors, that everything came at a cost. And while Evelyn seemed genuine, her words raised as many questions as they answered. Why was she so insistent on helping him? What was the reason behind her turmoil last night? And what did she mean when she said fate had brought them together? As he struggled to find the right words, Evelyn leaned forward, her expression soft but urgent. "I know this is a lot to process," she said, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "You don't have to decide anything now. Take your time. But I want you to know that my intentions are sincere. You saved my life, Liam, and I can't ignore that." Liam nodded slowly, though his thoughts were anything but calm. "I appreciate it," he said finally, his voice quieter than he intended. "But why me? You don't even know me." Evelyn's lips pressed into a thin line as if she had expected the question, but wasn't entirely prepared to answer it. "Sometimes the people who help us the most are the ones we least expect," she said after a pause. "I can't explain it, but I believe there's a reason our paths crossed. I want to make sure that reason leads to something good." Before Liam could respond, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed down the hallway. A tall, imposing man in his late 40s entered the room, his presence as commanding as the house itself. He was sharply dressed, his silver hair neatly combed back, and his eyes scanned the room with a practiced intensity. Liam guessed instantly that this was Charles Astor, Evelyn's husband. "Evelyn," Charles said, his voice deep and controlled, though there was an undercurrent of tension in his tone. His gaze shifted to Liam, narrowing slightly as if assessing him. "Is this the young man you mentioned?" Evelyn stood, smoothing her hands nervously over her dress. "Yes, Charles. This is Liam. He's the one who—" She hesitated, glancing briefly at Liam. "The one who helped me last night." Charles studied Liam for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with a curt nod, he extended a hand. "Charles Astor, thank you for your quick thinking. My wife's well-being means everything to me." Liam shook his hand, the man's grip firm and deliberate. "I'm glad I was there," he said simply, unsure of what else to say under the weight of Charles' intense gaze. Charles released his hand and turned to Evelyn, his tone sharp but quiet. "A word. Alone." It wasn't a request. Evelyn hesitated, glancing at Liam before nodding. "Liam, would you excuse us for a moment? Please, make yourself comfortable." Liam nodded and sat back down as Evelyn and Charles stepped out of the room. The heavy door closed behind them, but even through the thick walls, he could hear their muffled voices. Charles' tone was low but forceful, and Evelyn's replies were quieter, almost pleading. Liam tried not to listen, but the tension was impossible to ignore. As he waited, his gaze wandered around the room, taking in the lavish decor. Everything about this house screamed wealth and power, yet it also felt cold, as though it lacked the warmth of a real home. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this family than met the eye. Minutes later, Evelyn returned, her composure intact, but her eyes betraying a hint of sadness. Charles didn't follow her, and she offered Liam a small, apologetic smile. "I'm sorry about that," she said, sitting back down. "Charles can be protective." Liam didn't know what to say, so he simply nodded. He could tell there was a lot she wasn't telling him, and he wasn't sure if it was out of discretion or fear. Either way, it only deepened the mystery. Evelyn's tone softened. "There's something I need you to understand, Liam. Charles has built an empire, but with success comes challenges, things most people don't see. Our lives are not as perfect as they might appear." Her words hung in the air, and Liam felt a strange mix of sympathy and suspicion. He wanted to believe her, but he couldn't ignore the unease creeping into his thoughts. What kind of challenges was she referring to? And why did it feel like he was being drawn into something far bigger than he realized? Before he could ask, the butler returned with a tray of tea and snacks, interrupting the moment. Evelyn thanked him and poured a cup for Liam, her movements calm and precise, as though she were trying to restore a sense of normalcy. As they sipped their tea, Evelyn changed the subject, asking about Liam's life. At first, he was hesitant, unsure of how much to share, but a genuine interest gradually put him at ease. He told her about his part-time job as a delivery boy, his dreams of going to college, and the struggles he faced trying to make ends meet. Evelyn listened intently, her expression softening with every word. "You have a good heart, Liam," she said when he finished. "It's rare to find someone so selfless, especially at your age. I admire that." Liam blushed, unused to such praise. "I just do what I can," he said modestly. "I don't really think about it." Evelyn smiled, but there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "If only more people thought that way," she said quietly. Their conversation was interrupted again, this time by the faint sound of the phone ringing. Evelyn excused herself, leaving Liam alone once more. As he sat there, his mind replayed everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. The encounter on the bridge, the mysterious invitation, Charles's guarded demeanor. It all felt like pieces of a puzzle he couldn't yet put together. Minutes later, Evelyn returned, her expression more serious than before. "I'm sorry, Liam," she said, her tone brisk but kind. "I have to attend to something urgent. But before you go, I want you to take this." She handed him a small envelope, its weight heavier than he expected. Liam opened it carefully and found a check inside. His eyes widened at the amount. It was more money than he had ever seen in his life. "I can't take this," he said quickly, trying to hand it back. Evelyn shook her head. "It's not a handout, Liam. Consider it a thank you for saving my life and for giving me hope when I needed it most. Please, use it for whatever you need." Liam hesitated, torn between gratitude and pride. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. Evelyn smiled softly. "Just say you'll take care of yourself. That's all I want." As Liam left the mansion, the envelope tucked carefully into his pocket. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Evelyn's words echoed in his mind, as did the intensity of Charles' gaze. Something about this family didn't add up, and he couldn't help but wonder if he was being drawn into a world far more complicated and dangerous than he ever imagined. As Liam rode his bike home, the weight of the envelope in his pocket felt heavier with each pedal stroke. He hadn't even looked at the exact amount after that first stunned glance. All he knew was it could change his life in ways he hadn't thought possible. But as much as the money offered a glimmer of hope, it also came with a shadow of uncertainty. Something about the Astor's world felt off, as though he had stumbled into a story far more complex than he could understand. By the time he reached his small apartment, the city lights had begun to flicker on, casting long shadows in the dim hallways. He let himself in, tossed his backpack on the floor, and pulled out the envelope. Sitting on the edge of his worn couch, he stared at the check again. It was surreal. A few $1,000s given to him like it was nothing. To Evelyn, maybe it wasn't. But to Liam, it was the kind of money that could pay for overdue bills, college applications, and months of food. Yet every time he thought about cashing it, Charles' sharp gaze crept back into his mind. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Liam kept replaying his brief interactions with the Astors, piecing together the fragments of their lives he had glimpsed. Evelyn's sadness, her cryptic remarks about challenges and fate, Charles' protective demeanor, the way he had pulled Evelyn aside to talk. And then there was the lingering question that gnawed at him. What had pushed Evelyn to that bridge in the first place? The next morning, Liam woke to a buzzing sound. Groggy, he fumbled for his phone and saw an unfamiliar number flashing on the screen. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello, Liam, it's Evelyn." Her voice came through, calm but urgent. "I need to see you. Can you come to the house today?" Liam sat up, his pulse quickening. "Is everything okay?" he asked, though he could already sense that it wasn't. There was a pause before Evelyn replied. "I'll explain when you're here, please. It's important." Despite his reservations, Liam agreed. He felt an odd sense of responsibility, like he was somehow tied to whatever Evelyn was going through. He couldn't shake the feeling that saving her that night on the bridge had connected their lives in a way neither of them fully understood. When he arrived at the Astor mansion, the air felt heavier than before. The butler greeted him with the same polite demeanor, but Liam noticed something different. A subtle tension, as though everyone in the house was walking on eggshells. Evelyn met him in the sitting room, her expression more serious than before. "Liam," she said, her tone brisk but filled with a quiet desperation. "Thank you for coming. What's going on?" Liam asked, his voice steady despite the unease settling in his chest. Evelyn glanced toward the door, as if making sure they weren't being overheard. Then she leaned in closer. I didn't want to involve you in this, but I don't have anyone else I can trust. Charles doesn't understand, and the people around us, they all have their own agendas. Liam frowned, his confusion growing. What are you talking about? Evelyn hesitated, then finally said, that night on the bridge wasn't just about me feeling overwhelmed. It was about a decision I made, a decision that's put me in danger. The words sent a chill down Liam's spine. Danger? From who? Evelyn sighed, her hands trembling slightly as she clasped them together. Charles' business isn't as clean as it looks. He's involved with people who, let's just say, they operate in the shadows. I discovered something recently, something I wasn't supposed to know. And now, she trailed off, her gaze dropping to the floor. Liam leaned forward, his voice low. Now what? Now they see me as a threat. Evelyn said, her voice barely above a whisper. I tried to confront Charles about it, but he wouldn't listen. He told me to stay out of it, to let him handle things. But I can't. I've already seen too much, and if I don't do something... She shook her head, unable to finish the thought. Liam's mind raced. He was just a teenager, a delivery boy who barely scraped by. What could he possibly do to help someone like Evelyn Astor? Someone caught in the web of wealth, power, and danger. Yet here he was, sitting in her mansion, listening to a story that felt more like a thriller than real life. Why are you telling me this? He asked cautiously. What do you need from me? Evelyn met his gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. Because I trust you, Liam. You're not part of Charles' world. You're different. And I need someone who can help me without getting caught up in all of this. Liam stared at her, unsure of what to say. Part of him wanted to walk away, to return to his simple life, and leave the Astors to deal with their own problems. But another part of him, a stronger, more instinctive part, knew he couldn't. He had been there for Evelyn when she was at her lowest. How could he turn his back on her now? Before he could respond, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. Evelyn's face paled, and she stood quickly, motioning for Liam to do the same. It's Charles, she said under her breath. Stay calm. The door opened, and Charles entered, his expression cold and unreadable. He looked between Evelyn and Liam, his eyes narrowing slightly. What's going on here? He asked, his tone sharp. Nothing, Evelyn said smoothly, though her voice carried a slight edge. Liam was just leaving. Charles' gaze lingered on Liam for a moment before he nodded curtly. Good, we had more pressing matters to deal with. Liam didn't need to be told twice. He stood, mumbling a quick goodbye to Evelyn before hurrying out of the room. But as he left the mansion, his mind was anything but clear. Evelyn's words echoed in his ears, her fear and desperation carving a permanent place in his thoughts. Something dark was happening behind the Astor's pristine facade, and whether he liked it or not, he was now a part of it. As he pedaled home, Liam couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The streets felt quieter than usual, the shadows longer. He glanced over his shoulder more than once, his heart pounding with every turn. It wasn't until he reached his apartment and locked the door behind him that he allowed himself to exhale. But the sense of unease didn't leave him. He pulled out his phone and began searching for information about Charles Astor's business dealings. Most of what he found was polished and professional, but buried in the depths of forums and obscure articles were whispers of shady partnerships and questionable deals. Liam leaned back in his chair, his pulse racing. Evelyn had been right. There was more to Charles' empire than met the eye. And now, whether he liked it or not, he was entangled in their world. A world where secrets were dangerous and trust was a rare commodity. As the hours ticked by, Liam realized something else. Whatever was happening, it wasn't just about the Astors. It was about him too. By saving Evelyn that night, he had stepped into a story he couldn't walk away from. And the more he thought about it, the more he knew. This was only the beginning. Liam sat in his dimly lit apartment, staring at the screen of his laptop. The more he read about Charles Astor's business dealings, the more uneasy he felt. The whispers of corruption and ties to dangerous people weren't just rumors. They painted a picture of a man willing to cross any line for power and wealth. And Evelyn, caught in the middle, seemed to be teetering on the edge of a precipice she couldn't escape. As Liam leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his heart skipping a beat when he saw another unknown number. For a moment, he considered ignoring it. But something told him this wasn't the kind of situation he could avoid. With a steadying breath, he picked up. Liam? The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, deep and gravelly. Yes, who's this? Liam asked, his tone cautious. There was a pause, then the man said, let's just say I know you've been spending time with the Astors. I'm calling to give you some advice. Walk away. Whatever Evelyn told you, whatever she thinks she's doing, it's not your problem. Liam froze. The calm but threatening tone sent a chill down his spine. Who are you? What do you want? What I want is for you to stay out of things that don't concern you, the man said, his voice sharpening. This isn't a game, kid. People who get involved in Astor business don't come out unscathed. Before Liam could respond, the line went dead. He stared at his phone, his mind racing. Who was that? How did they know about him? And more importantly, what had Evelyn gotten herself into that would prompt such a call? The next day, Liam decided he needed answers. He couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that Evelyn was in deeper trouble than she was letting on. Despite the threat, he made his way back to the Astor mansion. The butler seemed surprised to see him, but let him in after a brief hesitation. Evelyn was in the sitting room, pacing anxiously. She looked up as Liam entered, relief washing over her face. "Liam," she said, rushing toward him. "I'm so glad you're here. I wasn't sure you'd come back." Liam didn't waste time. "Evelyn, what's really going on?" "Someone called me last night. They knew about you, about me. They told me to stay out of this." Evelyn's expression faltered, fear flashing in her eyes. She sank into a chair, her hands trembling. "I was afraid this would happen," she said softly. "They're watching everyone close to me. They know you helped me, and now they're trying to scare you away." "Who are they?" Liam asked, his voice firm. Evelyn hesitated, then said, "People connected to Charles' business. Powerful people who operate outside the law. I uncovered something, a financial trail leading to offshore accounts, bribes, and worse. It was enough to ruin Charles and everyone involved." She looked up at Liam, her eyes filled with desperation. "That's why I was on the bridge that night. I thought it would be easier to end it all than to face them." Liam's stomach churned. "Easier for who?" he asked, his voice rising slightly. "What about the people who care about you? What about the truth? If these people are as dangerous as you say, don't you think they need to be stopped?" Evelyn shook her head. "You don't understand, Liam. They don't play fair. They'll do whatever it takes to protect themselves, even if it means hurting innocent people. That's why I can't let you get involved. It's too dangerous." Before Liam could respond, the door burst open, and Charles strode in. His face was a mask of barely restrained anger. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his eyes flicking between Liam and Evelyn. Evelyn stood, her composure cracking. "Charles, we need to talk. About everything." Charles' jaw tightened. "Not now, Evelyn." "Yes, now," she insisted. "Liam deserves to know the truth. He's already involved whether we like it or not." Charles' gaze darkened as he turned to Liam. "You should leave. This is a family matter." Liam stood his ground. "I'm not going anywhere until I understand what's happening." The room was thick with tension as Charles stared at Liam, his expression unreadable. Finally, he exhaled sharply and said, "Fine. You want the truth. The truth is that Evelyn doesn't know what she's talking about. She's overreacting as usual." "That's not true, and you know it." Evelyn shot back, her voice shaking with anger. "You've been lying to me for years, Charles, about your business, about the people you work with, and now it's all falling apart." Charles's face hardened, but before he could respond, the sound of shattering glass echoed through the house. All three of them froze, their eyes darting toward the source of the noise. "What was that?" Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling. Charles moved quickly, signaling for the butler, who appeared moments later, pale and visibly shaken. "Sir," the butler said, his voice tight, "there's been a breach." Security spotted men on the grounds. Liam's heart raced as Charles barked orders, his calm facade crumbling. Evelyn grabbed Liam's arm, her grip tight. "You need to leave now," she said urgently. "I'm not leaving you," Liam said firmly. Evelyn shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "Please, Liam, this isn't your fight." But before either of them could move, the sitting room door slammed open, and two men stepped inside, their faces shadowed and their intentions unmistakably hostile. Liam's pulse pounded as he realized the danger was no longer abstract. It was right in front of them, and there was no escaping it now.